The great chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from 100 different worlds. Some had scales, some had fur, some were made of crystal, and some were just floating clouds of gas. They had gathered here for thousands of years to discuss matters of peace and war among the stars. But today, the mood was different. Today, there was tension in the air. High Commander Zorvax of the Velthrani Empire stood at the center of the chamber. He was tall, almost 8 feet, with dark green scales covering his body and 4 yellow eyes that seemed to glow with ambition. His species had conquered dozens of worlds. They were known throughout the galaxy as brutal and efficient warriors who had never lost a war. "I stand before you today to make an announcement," Zorvax said, his voice deep and filled with confidence. "The Velthrani Empire has chosen its next target for expansion. We will be conquering the 3rd planet of the Sol system. The primitive species that lives there calls it Earth." A wave of whispers moved through the chamber. Most of the delegates had heard of Earth. It was a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy, home to a young species that had only recently discovered how to leave their own world. They were considered primitive by galactic standards, barely worth noticing. But one delegate did not whisper. Ambassador Crix of the Malorian Collective slowly rose from his seat. He was ancient, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His pale blue skin was wrinkled with age, and his large, dark eyes held the wisdom of watching civilizations rise and fall for over 2,000 years. "Hi, Commander," Crix said, his voice calm but firm. "I must strongly advise you to reconsider this decision." Zorvax turned to face the old ambassador with an amused expression. "And why is that, Ambassador? Are you afraid we will fail?" "The Velthrani have never failed." "It is not fear for you that moves me to speak," Crix replied. "It is fear for what you might awaken. The humans are not like other species we have observed. There is something different about them. Something dangerous." Laughter erupted from the Velthrani delegation. Zorvax joined them, his 4 eyes crinkling with amusement. "Dangerous. They cannot even travel faster than light. They still use chemical rockets and primitive projectile weapons. They spend half their time fighting among themselves over patches of dirt and imaginary lines on maps. What could possibly be dangerous about them?" Crix did not smile. "That is precisely what concerns me. They fight constantly, yet their civilization has not destroyed itself. They adapt. They overcome. They survive. I have watched them for many years, High Commander. I have seen them split the atom and walk on their moon within a single generation. I have seen them create weapons that could destroy their entire world, and yet they still stand. There is a fire in them that I have not seen in any other species." Zorvax waved his hand dismissively. "Poetry and superstition. The Malorians have grown soft from too many centuries of peace. The humans will fall like every other species we have conquered. I expect complete victory within 3 rotations of their moon." "Then you are a fool," Crix said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The chamber went silent. No one had ever spoken to a Velthrani High Commander that way, and lived. Zorvax's eyes narrowed, but after a long moment, he simply smiled. "We shall see, old one. We shall see." 6,000 light-years away, on a quiet street in the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, Katie Morgan was lying under her father's old pickup truck, trying to fix a leak in the transmission. She was 23 years old, with short brown hair and grease stains on her face. She had graduated from college 2 years ago with an engineering degree, but had come back home to help her father after her mother passed away. "Hand me the wrench," she called out. Her father, Pete Morgan, grabbed the tool from the workbench and knelt down to pass it to her. He was 52 years old, with gray hair and a face that showed the hard years of his life. He had served as a Marine for 20 years, done 3 tours in places he did not like to talk about, and now spent his days fixing cars and trying to enjoy his retirement. "You know," Pete said, "you could have stayed in the city. Got a good job at one of those tech companies. You did not have to come back here." Katie slid out from under the truck and wiped her hands on a rag. "And leave you alone to burn down the house trying to cook dinner? Not a chance, old man." Psst, Pete smiled. It was the same argument they had every few weeks, and it always ended the same way. They both knew she'd come back because they were all each other had left. Katie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from her younger brother Danny, who was stationed at Peterson's Space Force Base in Colorado. She had always thought his job was boring, just sitting around watching satellites and radar screens. The message was only 5 words long. Turn on the news now. Something in those words made her stomach tight. Danny was not the type to get excited about nothing. She walked into the house with her father following behind her and turned on the television. The screen showed a news anchor who looked like he had seen a ghost. Behind him was an image that did not make any sense. It showed the moon, and coming around from behind it were shapes. Dozens of shapes. Hundreds of shapes. They were massive, dark, angular things that blocked out the stars as they moved. "We are receiving reports," the anchor said, his voice shaking, "that these objects are not natural. They appear to be artificial structures of some kind. The government has not yet made any official statement, but sources are telling us that these are... He could not finish the sentence. Pete Morgan stood very still, watching the screen. Katie looked at her father and saw something change in his face. The easygoing mechanic who told bad jokes and complained about his back was gone. In his place was someone harder, someone older, someone who had seen things that had never left him. "Dad?" Katie said softly. Pete did not answer right away. He just kept watching those shapes grow larger on the screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had made peace with death a long time ago. "Go get my rifle from the closet," he said, "and call your brother. Tell him we are going to need to know everything he knows." Katie wanted to say something, to ask questions, to make sense of what was happening, but she saw the look in her father's eyes and knew that questions could wait. She ran to the closet outside. The sky was still blue and peaceful. Birds were still singing. Children were still playing in yards down the street. None of them knew that everything was about to change, in orbit around the moon. High Commander Zorvax looked at the blue planet on his view screen and smiled. 300 warships followed behind his flagship. The largest invasion force the Valthrani Empire had ever assembled for such a small world. "Begin the approach," he ordered. "By tomorrow, this planet will belong to us." He had no idea how wrong he was. The Valthrani fleet descended on Earth like a dark cloud blocking out the sun. 300 warships spread across the sky, their massive forms casting shadows over cities and farmlands alike. From New York to Tokyo, from London to Sydney. People looked up and felt a fear that their ancestors had not known for thousands of years. The fear of something greater than themselves. High Commander Zorvax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the crushing fist, watching the blue planet grow larger on his view screen. He had done this many times before. The script was always the same. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, crush any resistance, and claim victory. It was simple and efficient. "Open a channel to all frequencies," he ordered. "Broadcast in every language these primitives use." His communications officer obeyed, and Zorvax began to speak. His words were translated and sent to every television, every radio, every phone on the planet. "People of Earth, I am High Commander Zorvax of the Valthrani Empire. Your world now belongs to us. You will surrender immediately. Any resistance will be met with complete destruction. You have 1 hour to respond." Then he sat back and waited. He expected panic. He expected governments to fall over themselves trying to negotiate. He expected the fear that always came when lesser species faced the might of the Valthrani. What he did not expect was what actually happened. Deep, beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a bunker that had been built during the Cold War and upgraded every decade since, General Linda Patterson was already moving. She was 54 years old, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of war humans could wage against each other. She had spent her entire career being told that preparing for an alien invasion was a waste of time and money. She had prepared anyway. "All units. This is Overlord Actual," she said into her radio, her voice calm and clear. "Execute Protocol Gray. I repeat, execute Protocol Gray. This is not a drill." Across the world, things began to happen. In Montana and Wyoming and North Dakota, missile silos that had been pointed at other countries for decades slowly turned their aim upward. Fighter jets scrambled from bases in Germany and Japan and Australia. Submarines that had been silent for months rose to launch depth. Humanity had spent the last 80 years preparing to destroy itself. It turned out that those same preparations worked just as well against an outside enemy. The first Velthrani dropship landed in Central Park, right in the heart of New York City. It was a bold move, designed to show that the invaders feared nothing. The ship was the size of a football field, and when it opened, 200 Velthrani warriors marched out in perfect formation. They wore black armor and carried plasma rifles that could burn through steel. They were the elite of the elite, the finest soldiers the Empire had ever produced. They expected to find terrified civilians running in all directions. What they found was Eddie Kowalski. Eddie was 58 years old. He had sold hot dogs in Central Park for 30 years. He was short, bald, and had a belly that showed he enjoyed his own product. He had also served in Vietnam when he was young, and some lessons you never forget. He had heard the announcement. He had seen the ship land, and he had gone to his cart and pulled out the shotgun he kept hidden under the napkins. The one he had bought after getting robbed for the third time. The Velthrani. Commander saw the small humans standing in their path and felt something like amusement. "Move aside, creature, or be destroyed." Eddie pumped his shotgun. "Welcome to New York, you ugly son of a gun," he fired. The Velthrani had shields, but they were designed to stop energy weapons. The cloud of lead pellets tore through like the shields were not there and hit the commander square in the chest. He went down, and for a moment, everyone just stared. Then all hell broke loose. It turned out that New Yorkers did not scare easily. They dealt with crowded subways, impossible rent, and cockroaches the size of small dogs. Aliens were just another problem to solve. From every direction, people attacked. Office workers threw computers from windows. Taxi drivers drove their cars into Velthrani formations. A group of construction workers discovered that nail guns worked surprisingly well against alien armor at close range. A grandmother on the 15th floor of an apartment building dropped a television on a squad of invaders and then went back for her. Microwave. The Velthrani had never faced anything like this. They had conquered peaceful species who surrendered at the first sign of force. They had fought warrior cultures who met them in open battle. But they had never fought a species where everyone, from soldiers to grandmothers, from police officers to hot dog vendors, simply refused to stop fighting within an hour. The Central Park landing force had been destroyed, not defeated. Not driven back, destroyed. Similar scenes played out across the planet. In London, the Queen's Guard, those soldiers in redcoats who tourists loved to photograph, proved that their rifles were not just for show. In Tokyo, the Japanese self-defense force demonstrated centuries of martial tradition adapted for modern warfare. In Texas, well, the Velthrani learned very quickly why humans had a saying about messing with Texas. Zorvax watched the reports come in with growing disbelief. His tactical officer, a young Velthrani named Vex, stood beside him, his scales pale with shock. "Hi, Commander. We have lost contact with 60% of our ground forces. The humans are not surrendering. They are. They are attacking us." "That is impossible," Zorvax said, but the evidence was right in front of him. "They are primitives. They should be cowering in fear." "Perhaps," Vex said carefully, "we should reconsider our approach. The Malorian ambassador did warn us. ... Zorvax spun around, his four eyes blazing with anger. "I do not need reminders from cowardly diplomats. We will simply increase our forces. Deploy the second wave. Deploy the third wave. Deploy everything. Everything, High Commander. Everything. These humans wish to fight. Then we will teach them what it means to face the full might of the Velthrani Empire." On the ground, as the sun set over New York City, Eddie Kowalski sat on an overturned Velthrani transport, eating one of his own hot dogs. Around him, soldiers and civilians alike were catching their breath, treating wounds and preparing for what came next. A young National Guard soldier sat down beside him. "How are you so calm?" she asked. "We just fought aliens." Eddie shrugged. "Kid, I survived Vietnam, 3 divorces, and running a small business in this city for 30 years. Some overgrown lizards with fancy guns? That is just Tuesday. Finished his hot dog and stood up, grabbing his shotgun. Oh, come on. I heard there are more of them landing in Brooklyn. And nobody invades Brooklyn on my watch. Above them, more dropships were descending through the atmosphere. The war had only begun. But something had changed in those first hours. The humans had proven that they would not break. They would not surrender. They would fight until the last one of them was standing. And somewhere watching, from very far away, Ambassador Crix of the Malorian Collective shook his head sadly. I tried to warn them, he said to no one in particular. No one ever listens. 2 weeks into the invasion, the Galactic Council had stopped all other business. Every delegate, every diplomat, every observer was glued to their screens, watching the impossible happen in real time. A primitive species with no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, and no plasma weapons was fighting the Velthrani Empire to a standstill. Ambassador Crix called an emergency session to explain what was happening. The chamber was more crowded than it had been in centuries. Species who had not attended a council meeting in 100 years had sent representatives. Everyone wanted to understand. What you are witnessing, Crix said, projecting images onto the central display, is something we have never seen before. The humans are adapting. The images showed captured Velthrani equipment being taken apart by human scientists. They showed factories that had been making cars now producing weapons. They showed soldiers using alien plasma rifles. Alongside their own projectile weapons, analysts estimate that the humans reverse-engineered Velthrani shield technology in approximately 72 hours, Crix continued. They have already developed countermeasures and are distributing the knowledge globally through their primitive communication networks. The Vorten delegate, a being made of living crystal, hummed a question. How is this possible? It took our species 500 years to understand shield technology after we first encountered it. Crix pulled up a new image. It showed a young human female in a small room filled with electronic equipment. This is what they call a garage. The human you see is 19 years old. She has been broadcasting instructions to millions of her kind, showing them how to modify captured weapons for greater effect. The young woman, whose name was Mia Delgado, was holding a Velthrani plasma rifle that had been torn apart and rebuilt. So basically, Mia said in the video, the power cell connects here. But if you reroute it through this capacitor, you can triple the output. Fair warning, it will probably explode after about 10 shots, but those 10 shots will really count. Also, I figured out how to make the beam wider, which is great for close quarters. Just do not point it at anything you like, including yourself. I made that mistake once. My eyebrows are just now growing back. The chamber was silent as the implications sank in. This was not organized military research. This was random civilians sharing knowledge openly, improving on each other's work in real time. The humans have a concept they call open source, Crix explained. They share knowledge freely so that everyone can improve upon it. What one human learns, all humans learn. We estimate that over 50 million humans are currently working on adapting Velthrani technology. The adaptation was happening everywhere, in a small town in Georgia. A retired engineer named Larry Simmons had figured out how to build a device that disrupted Velthrani communications. He had posted the instructions online, and within 3 days, over 2,000 units had been built by people in their homes. In Mumbai, a team of software developers had cracked the encryption on Velthrani data tablets. They were now reading enemy communications in real time and sharing the intelligence with military forces worldwide. In Berlin, a group of university students had modified a commercial drone to carry small explosives. The design was simple, cheap, and effective. Thousands of them now filled the skies over occupied territories, attacking from angles the Velthrani had never considered. The humans were not just fighting. They were learning. They were improving. They were getting better at war with each passing day. Pete Morgan had rejoined the Marines. At 52, he was older than most of the soldiers around him, but the military was not being picky. They needed everyone who could fight, and Pete had skills that no training course could replace. He had been promoted to Master Sergeant and given command of a special unit that mixed veterans with younger soldiers. His daughter Katie had completed her ROTC training in record time, and received a commission as a lieutenant in the newly formed Earth Defense Force. The EDF was a combined military organization that brought together soldiers from every nation. Old enemies fought side by side. Americans and Russians, Indians and Pakistanis, Israelis and Iranians. The invasion had done something that humans had never managed on their own. It had united them. Father and daughter met at a forward operating base in what used to be central Ohio. The Velthrani had hit the Midwest hard, trying to control the agricultural heartland. They had learned that hungry humans were even more dangerous than well-fed ones. "I told you to stay home," Pete said when he saw Katie in her uniform. "And I told you the same thing," she replied. "I guess stubbornness runs in the family." Pete looked at his daughter, at the rifle on her shoulder, and the determined set of her jaw. He felt a complicated mix of pride and fear. He had hoped she would never know war. But now that war had come to her, he was glad she was ready to face it. "Your mother would have been proud," he said quietly. Katie nodded. "She would have been fighting right beside us. Probably would have organized the whole neighborhood into a militia by day 2. They both smiled at that, because it was true. Margaret Morgan had been a force of nature when she was alive. A messenger ran up to them. "Lieutenant Morgan, Master Sergeant Morgan, we have movement. Velthrani convoy approaching from the north. Command wants your unit to intercept." Pete and Katie exchanged a look. Then they both checked their weapons and started walking toward their positions. "Stay low and watch your corners," Pete told his daughter. "Same to you, old man. Try not to throw out your back." The battle that followed was like 100 others happening across the planet. The humans used their knowledge of the terrain, their improvised weapons, and their complete refusal to give up. The Velthrani had better technology, better armor, and more firepower. But the humans had something else. They had anger. They had determination. They had the knowledge that there was nowhere left to run. 3 hours later, the Velthrani convoy was destroyed. Katie had taken a burn to her arm from a plasma shot, and Pete had broken 2 ribs when an explosion threw him into a wall. But they were alive, and the enemy was not. High Commander Zorvax received the report along with dozens of others like it. He had lost another 3,000 soldiers. His fleet was running low on supplies. His troops were exhausted and demoralized. "This was supposed to be simple," he said to the empty room. "This was supposed to be easy." He looked at the map of Earth on his screen. So many red zones, marking areas where the Velthrani had been pushed back. So few green zones marking areas under their control. And every day, the red grew larger for the first time in his life. High Commander Zorvax began to consider the possibility that he might lose in the Galactic Council chamber. Ambassador Crix watched the same data with a very different expression. It was not quite a smile, but there was something satisfied in his ancient eyes. "I warned them," he said again. "The humans do not surrender. They do not give up. They adapt and overcome. And now the Velthrani are learning what happens when you corner a species that is spent. Its entire history fighting for survival." He turned to face the other delegates, who were watching him with a mixture of fear and fascination.
My friends.
"I suggest we begin preparing for a very different future. Because when this war is over, nothing in the galaxy will be the same." 4 weeks into the invasion, something happened that no one in the galaxy had predicted. The humans went to space, not with their old chemical rockets that took days to reach their moon, not with slow, primitive spacecraft that could barely escape their own gravity. They came with ships that burned with stolen fire. Vessels built from human determination and Velthrani technology fused together into something new. Something terrifying. Captain Samuel Hayes stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Defiance and looked out at the stars. 3 months ago, he had been commanding a submarine deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. He had spent his career learning how to fight in 3 dimensions, how to track enemies he could not see, how to strike from the darkness. It turned out that space was not so different from the ocean depths. The Defiance was not beautiful. She was ugly, in fact. Patchwork of human steel and captured alien materials welded together by engineers who were learning as they built. Her engines were a mix of nuclear reactors and Velthrani power cores. Her weapons were human missiles, upgraded with alien warheads. She was held together by hope and determination as much as by bolts and welds. But she flew, and she fought. Approaching the Velthrani flagship captain, his tactical officer reported, "They are hailing us." Samuel took a deep breath. "Put them through." The face of High Commander Zorvax appeared on the screen. Samuel studied his enemy carefully. The alien looked tired. His scales, which had been bright green in all the broadcasts, now looked dull and gray. His 4 eyes, which had burned with confidence, now held something different. Doubt. "Human vessel," Zorvax said. "This is High Commander Zorvax of the Velthrani Empire. I must admit, I did not expect you to reach us here. Your accomplishment is ... impressive." "Thank you," Samuel said. "We try, but it changes nothing. You cannot win this war. Even if you defeat my fleet, the Empire will send more. You have no allies, no support, no experience in galactic warfare. Surrender now, and I will ensure your species is treated with mercy." Samuel leaned forward in his chair. "Let me tell you a story, Commander. About 80 years ago, on December 7th, 1941, a nation attacked my country. They bombed our ships while we were at peace. They thought we were soft. They thought we were weak. They thought we would not fight back." Zorvax listened, his expression unreadable. "They were wrong," Samuel continued. 4 years later, that nation surrendered on the deck of one of our ships. They'd started a war they could not finish, and they paid the price. Do you know what my people learned from that experience? Enlighten me. We learned that when someone hits you, you hit them back harder. We learned that we are not as soft as we look. And we learned that there is nothing more dangerous in this universe than a human being with their back against the wall. Samuel smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "You have 24 hours to withdraw your forces from Earth. After that, we are coming for your fleet. And after that, Commander, we are going to find out where you live." He cut the transmission before Zorvax could respond, his first officer. A woman named Grace Porter, who had been a fighter pilot before the invasion, looked at him with raised eyebrows. "That was quite a speech, Captain. I've been practicing it for 2 weeks," Samuel admitted. "I wanted to get it right. Did you mean it? The part about going after their homeworld?" Samuel looked back out at the stars. "Ask me again, after we win this battle." On Earth, the tide was turning. Human forces now equipped with hybrid technology and filled with 4 weeks of rage and determination launched coordinated attacks on Velthrani positions worldwide in Berlin. A coalition of European forces smashed through Velthrani defenses in 18 hours of brutal urban combat. German tanks rolled through streets that had seen too many wars alongside French infantry and British artillery. Old enemies fought as brothers. In Tokyo, the Japanese Self-Defense Force, working with American Marines and Australian Special Forces, destroyed the largest Velthrani ground base on the planet. The aliens had taken over Tokyo Dome, thinking its size made it a good command center. They had not counted on the determination of a people who remembered Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who had rebuilt their nation from ashes once and would do it again if necessary in Brazil. In the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, local militias held off a Velthrani counterattack for 3 days. They used knowledge of the narrow streets and steep hills to ambush alien patrols. They fought with captured weapons, homemade explosives, and the absolute conviction that this was their home and no one was going to take it from them. In New York City, Eddie Kowalski was still selling hot dogs. He had set up his cart in Times Square, right in front of a wrecked Velthrani transport that someone had spray-painted with the words "Welcome to Earth." "You know," he told a young soldier who had stopped to buy lunch, "I thought about closing up shop when this all started, taking my savings and hiding in the countryside somewhere."
What changed your mind?"
the soldier asked. Eddie shrugged. "I figured if these guys take over, they're probably going to want hot dogs eventually. Someone has to teach them how it is done." "Might as well be me," the soldier laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. High Commander Zorvax watched his tactical display as another ship disappeared from the screen. That made 12 lost today. 12 ships that would never return to the Empire. 12 crews who would never see their homeworld again. His fleet, which had numbered 300 ships when the invasion began, was down to 173. 40 of those were so damaged they could barely maintain orbit. His ground forces had been cut in half. His supply lines were stretched to breaking, and now the humans had ships of their own. "High Commander," his tactical officer said nervously, "the human fleet is approaching. They have 12 vessels now." 12 Zorvax repeated. "We still outnumber them significantly." "Yes, High Commander. But their ships are ... strange. Our sensors have difficulty tracking them, and their weapons seem to bypass our shields at close range." Zorvax remembered the first days of the invasion, when he had laughed at the warnings of Ambassador Crix. Primitives, he had called them. Easy conquest, he had said. Now those primitives were hunting his fleet. "Order all ships to defensive formation," he commanded. "We will make our stand here." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was already too late. The humans were not just fighting anymore. They were winning. And something told him that winning was just the beginning. In orbit around Earth, Defiance and her sister ships moved into attack position. Captain Samuel Hayes watched the Velthrani fleet on his display, calculating angles and distances. "All ships, this is Defiance Actual," he broadcast. "Remember what they did to our cities? Remember what they did to our people. Today, we make them pay. All ships, attack." The first human space battle had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. 6 weeks after the first Velthrani ship appeared behind the moon, the war was over. High Commander Zorvax stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, his wrists bound by the traditional restraints reserved for defeated commanders. His scales, once bright green with health and pride, were now dull and gray. His 4 eyes, which had burned with ambition, now stared at the floor in shame. The chamber was more crowded than it had ever been. Representatives from every species in the known galaxy had come to witness this moment. The mighty Velthrani Empire, conquerors of 100 worlds, had been defeated by a species that most of them had never heard of until 2 months ago. Ambassador Crix rose to address the assembly. His ancient face showed no satisfaction, only a deep weariness. He had tried to warn them. No one had listened. And now countless lives had been lost because of pride and arrogance. "The war is concluded," Crix announced. "The Velthrani invasion force has been destroyed. High Commander Zorvax has surrendered unconditionally. And the humans." He paused, looking at the data on his tablet. "The humans have requested membership in the Galactic Council." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Some delegates looked frightened. Others looked fascinated. A few looked like they might be sick. "They have also submitted a list of terms for peace with the Velthrani Empire," Crix continued. "They demand full withdrawal from all positions in the Sol system. They demand reparations for damages to their world. And they demand..." He paused again, reading carefully. "They demand that any future aggression against Earth will be met with," and I quote, "swift and disproportionate response." The human ambassador rose from her seat. Her name was Victoria Santos, and she was 60 years old. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp brown eyes, and the calm confidence of someone who had spent her life navigating the treacherous waters of international politics. During the invasion, she had coordinated global diplomatic efforts from a bunker in Switzerland, keeping the alliance of nations together through sheer force of will. "Distinguished members of the Council," she began, her voice clear and steady. "6 weeks ago, your empire attacked our world without warning or provocation. You expected us to surrender. You expected us to bow. You expected us to accept our fate as conquered people." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You were wrong." The chamber was absolutely silent. "My species has been fighting since we first learned to pick up rocks and throw them at each other. We have survived ice ages and plagues. We have split the atom and walked on our moon. We have weapons that could destroy our entire world, and yet we still stand. Do you know why?" No one answered. "Because we do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not accept defeat. When you pushed us, we pushed back. When you hurt us, we learned how to hurt you more. When you brought your fleet, and your armies to our door. We built our own fleet in 6 weeks and sent you running." Victoria walked forward until she was standing directly in front of the Velthrani delegation. High Commander Zorvac still would not meet her eyes. "But we did not come here for revenge," she said, her voice softening slightly. "We came here to join you. Humanity's always looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. Now we know we are not, and we want to be part of this community. We offer friendship to those who offer it to us. We offer trade and cooperation. We offer our creativity, our determination, and our stubborn refusal to accept that anything is impossible." She turned back to face the full council. "But make no mistake. If anyone threatens our world again, they will learn the same lesson the Velthrani learned. We protect our own. We remember our enemies. And we never, ever lose." In the silence that followed, the Vorten delegate hummed a question. "What guarantee do we have that humans will not become conquerors themselves? You have shown remarkable capacity for violence." Victoria nodded, accepting the question. "You are right to ask. We are a violent species. We have done terrible things to each other throughout our history, but we have also learned from those mistakes. We know the cost of war better than anyone. We do not seek empire. We seek a future where our children can look up at the stars without fear. Give us a chance to prove ourselves, and we will be the greatest allies you have ever known." The vote was held that afternoon. By a margin of 3-1, humanity was accepted into the Galactic Council. Several species abstained, too frightened or uncertain to commit either way, but it was done. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. 3 months later, Lieutenant Katie Morgan stood on the observation deck of the Earth defense ship Victory, humanity's newest and largest vessel. The ship was beautiful in a way that the Defiance had never been. Designed from the ground up, rather than cobbled together from scraps. She represented the future of human space travel. Beside her stood her father, Master Sergeant Pete Morgan, who had been promoted twice since the war ended. His gray hair was a little thinner, and he moved more slowly than before, but his eyes were still sharp and clear. "I never thought I would see this," Pete said, looking out at the stars. "When I was young, we thought going to the moon was the greatest thing humans would ever do. Now look at us." Katie nodded. "Mom would have loved this, and she would have been first in line to volunteer. Probably would have ended up commanding her own ship." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars drift by. Behind them, a crew of humans from a dozen nations worked together, preparing for humanity's first expedition beyond the solar system. They were not going as conquerors, but as explorers, and maybe, just a little bit, as a warning. On Earth, life was slowly returning to normal. Cities were being rebuilt. Monuments were being erected to those who had fallen. A new holiday had been established, Liberation Day, celebrating the moment the last Velthrani ship fled Earth's orbit in New York City. Eddie Kowalski had expanded his business. He now had 3 hot dog carts and was considering franchising. The Congressional Medal of Honor he had been awarded sat in a drawer at his apartment because, as he told every reporter who asked, "I was just doing what any New Yorker would do. Some alien comes to my city, they are going to get a piece of my mind. And my shotgun. Mostly my shotgun." In the garage in Austin, Texas, Mia Delgado had graduated from modifying captured weapons to designing new ones. She had been recruited by the newly formed Earth Defense Research Division and was now leading a team of engineers developing the next generation of human spacecraft. She was 20 years old, and in Millbrook, Ohio, the Morgan family house still stood, a little more battered than before, but still standing. The pickup truck that Katie and Pete had been fixing on the day the invasion began was finally running again. It sat in the driveway, a reminder of normal life and the world they had fought to protect. Humanity. It's been tested in fire and had not been found wanting. They had proven something that the galaxy would never forget, that the small blue planet circling an unremarkable yellow star was home to the most dangerous, most adaptable, most terrifyingly persistent species the universe had ever seen in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Crix watched the human delegation take their seats for the first time. Victoria Santos caught his eye and nodded in respect. He nodded back. "I must ask, The Malorian delegate beside him whispered, "Do you think we made the right choice, accepting them?" Crix considered the question carefully. He thought about the war, about the millions who had died, about the lessons that had been learned. "I think," he said finally, "that we did not have a choice. The humans were coming to the stars whether we invited them or not. Better to have them as friends than as enemies." He paused, watching Victoria Santos shake hands with delegates from a dozen species. "Besides, I suspect the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place." Outside the chamber windows, the stars burned cold and bright, full of mysteries waiting to be discovered. And somewhere among them, human ships were already flying, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of a species that had refused to die. The invasion had been meant to end humanity. Instead, it had awakened them, and they were just getting started.